All right, everybody, if you want to go ahead and take your seats, I want to welcome you to Advancing Bike Share for All Abilities. This is a panel discussion with some of my friends that I've talked a lot to about in the last 6 months. So essentially, when we talk about the conversation of equity and bike share, it's often focused on the lack of access to communities of color and low-income populations, but what we're forgetting to talk about is who's not at the table, which is people who may not be able to ride typical two-wheel bikes like a lot of people that bike share is essentially made for. So we want to talk to you today about how we can explore that access and what some programs have done to address those needs in their community. So we have several communities that are here in various stages of adaptive bike share programs. So we have some that have been around for a long time, like Liz Hormann at Portland, all the way down to me, who we've just explored applying for grants and doing a community survey, and I'm in Lincoln, Nebraska. So it's definitely a process. This is not a one community, one answer, one solution. It's a multifaceted issue, much like every community has their own unique abilities and strengths and desires. That's essentially how we approach adaptive bike share products in our different systems. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce each person, and we're going to introduce you to their program. And then we're going to also follow that up with some moderator questions that I'm going to ask our panel to kind of spur that discussion. And then at the end of the session, I'm going to turn it over to you guys and give you guys the opportunity to ask some of those questions that you're wondering about, maybe not now, maybe while you're listening to the conversation. But, you know, what are we missing? Who's not at the table? How can we make these things adaptive and available to our community members that currently aren't enjoying that bike share, bicycle infrastructure experience that they could be? So here we go. So when we talk about equality versus equity, this graphic sums it up really well. Okay, they're not the same thing. Equality is providing the same access to everyone in the same manner. So as you can see, not all bikes work for every user. Equity is realizing that we have different abilities and then responding to those different abilities with the appropriate products. And so that's what we're talking about today, is we're talking about equity, not necessarily equality. And so what does that mean in the world that we're in today? Well, what that means is in the bike share, if you go outside and you look at the typical bikes that are locked up, bike town bicycles, what you see is a typical two-wheel bike that is people powered. But that doesn't work for everyone. Sometimes people need a little help because they have some muscle imbalance issues or whatever, and so maybe electric bicycles are more adept for their abilities. You also have maybe some balance issues, so maybe you need 3 wheels instead of 2. How do you make that available for those folks? And then sometimes you have people that maybe have some sight issues, or my oldest son happens to have autism, and so he's not comfortable riding a bicycle because there's so much stuff going on. And so for him, a side-by-side tandem with someone else riding with him would be what he would be into. And then last but not least, not everybody can pedal a bike using their legs. And so then you have those kind of products where maybe you use your hands to power it. Maybe you use other abilities that you do have to kind of assist you in propelling that forward motion. So that's what we're talking about today as well, is that there are different bicycles that give that necessary access to those people who currently are not being served. And so I want to give Liz Hormann from Adaptive Bike Town from Portland the ability to speak here, and then also Jeremy Robbins, who's from ADA Consulting and Advocacy, and he's a user of that system, and they definitely have unique experiences that I'd like you to hear. Liz, Jeremy?
Great, thank you. So I'm Liz Hormann with the Portland Bureau of Transportation, and then Jeremy is going to also be speaking. He was on our working group to set up Adaptive Bike Town. So before I hand it over to him to really talk a lot about our engagement process and program development, I just want to go over a few things of sort of what the program is, how it works, and some of the numbers over the first few years of operation. So Adaptive Biketown, this program was really born out of a mistake. When our Biketown bike share program launched in summer of 2016, it didn't account for users that were not able or not comfortable riding two-wheel bicycles. And so this was also quickly followed by 2 requests for accommodation for our program. So our commissioner at the time, as well as our director, tasked staff to develop a program that would really speak to the needs and the desires of the community. So our pilot project was launched in the summer of 2017, which for city work, from no idea to implementation in a year is actually pretty fast, and we're very excited about that, to offer adaptive cycles from our Curb Bikes, which is a bike shop rental shop here in Portland. So to give you an overview about how Adaptive Biketown works, because as you're probably already can tell, it does not function like a bike share system. And Jeremy's going to get into a little bit more about the engagement process and what we heard from the community. But this program was really built because it responded to 3 main takeaways from our community engagement. 1, the need and desire for a staffed service. 2, a place for people to store the mobility devices while they rode. And 3 was proximity to a multi-use path or trail. And so from all of this feedback, we developed Adaptive Biketown, where somebody can make a reservation for a bike online. This way it ensures that the bike is available. It also allows the user to provide some of the information that they might want to share with a person that's helping them get fitted on the bike. You are definitely not required to make a reservation online. Our operators accommodate people that just drop in, but the reservation system is nice to ensure that the bike will be there when you want to ride. 2, you show up to our Curb Bikes. They are located near OMSI, which is on the other side of the river, and they're right adjacent to one of our multi-use paths that can take you around the waterfront area and also connects to our Spring Water Corridor Trail. So the staff at the shop will get people fitted, put on any additional accessories, and then the person is free to ride. And these bikes can be ridden wherever the user would like, as long as they then return it to the shop. So again, unlike a bike share system, which usually are one-way trips, this functions a lot more like a rental service, where people can rent it for an hour, 2 hours to 3 hours. So again, this process really was developed and responded directly to what we heard from the community and how they wanted to use bikes in the city of Portland. So we've run Adaptive Biketown for 2 years as a pilot, and then in May of this year, we kicked off our first year as a formal permanent program where we are actually contracting officially with Curb Bikes to operate Adaptive Biketown year-round. So the exciting thing is that our ridership has increased year over year. We started with 59 rentals over the first 14 weeks of over our first summer. We had 189 rentals last year during 6 months of operation, and then we're already at 161 rides for the 2019 season, with really 2 more months of our kind of peak Portland riding season left to come. Additionally, 87% of our riders qualify for TriMet's Honored Citizens Pass, which is a discounted transit pass for people with disabilities, people on Medicare, and seniors over 65. So really showing that our program is serving the community and population that we set out to serve when we developed it. So now I just want to hand it over to Jeremy so he can talk a little more in depth about the program development and some of our engagement processes.
Hi there, I'm Jeremy Robbins. So the origins of Biketown were, again, this was the summer of 2016. And so Biketown and bike share programs was a unique transportation solution that was really gaining a lot of momentum in a lot of cities across the nation. But it was apparent by the way that the program utilized standard bicycles, 2-wheel bikes, and one-way trips, so no round trips, in an app-based system that people with disabilities were really not considered to be participants. Added to this was the complaint that the bikes actually further limited disabled people's mobility by blocking curb cuts, sidewalks, and other thoroughfares to the point of being a danger. So the last thing was funding. Because city programs fall under the ADA, they have to be available to people with disabilities. So PBOT and the city listened to the folks that were kind of rattling their chains, and they decided to form a work group to find some acceptable and accessible solutions. So the work group was amazing. The City of Portland and PBOT used a collaborative approach by identifying the needs of the diverse community stakeholders through surveys and information collecting at different events, some disability events, a bunch of community events, regarding the bikes and the types of transportation needs. One of the most surprising things was that three-wheeled bikes offered a plethora of solutions. I don't know why they didn't think of that before they launched. Out of these efforts, the group took shape with many voices at the table that are usually silent. Various forms of disabled groups with physical and invisible disabilities, senior and elder populations, and just a lot of stakeholders. The City of Portland hosted all of us in the Office of Equity, and diversity was really our strength and the core asset in development of this program. The lessons we learned is that it is incredibly challenging to mirror a transportation program that is designed for people that are able-bodied and taking mostly one-way trips without the help of mobility devices. So just by the very nature of the beast, it's tough to copy these programs. The group had to focus on the spirit of the program and not the mechanics to find a true adaptive solution in a way that was meaningful to the diverse disabled populations. Because wheelchairs and walkers and other mobility devices do not currently fit and transport well on adaptive bikes with limited numbers, the program was designed for round trips and community engagement more than for micro-transportation and the one-way rentals that Biketown was known for. With the advent of scooters and motorized transportation, the Adaptive Biketown program is also bound to follow suit with power assist devices. Final thoughts, the future is accessible. The ADA is over 30 years old and contributing to and continuing to adapt programs to meet the widest population. And as our populations grow, the disabled population does as well. This program is a work in progress. As both the adaptive bikes continue to change and the transportation needs change in the dynamics of the city. Case in point is the addition of motorized scooters and power assist options to the current fleet of adaptive bicycles. And that closes the gap and levels the playing field for families where everyone has diverse cycling abilities. The training of staff for upkeep and maintenance and helping diverse customers getting fitted to the bikes is the ongoing and relevant challenge that Biketown has. And then lastly is the hope to grow this program and expand the offerings with new bikes and other options. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. So next up, we have Rory Lincoln, the Director of Programming and Operations for Detroit, Michigan.
Hi, everyone. So we really benefit in building our adaptive program with lessons learned from Adaptive Biketown. They had launched their program about a year before we did. And something, adaptive cycling was something we were always considering from the beginning of our two-wheeled bike share system. But just logistics and operational capacity made it difficult to launch it in coordination with our two-wheeled program. So when we did launch our two-wheeled bike share system in May of 2017, an organization by the name of Peak, which is Programs to Educate All Cyclists, approached our executive director and said, it's fantastic that you're launching a two-wheeled bike share system in Detroit, offering new mobility options for Detroiters, but what are you going to do to accommodate the disabled population? And we said, that's a great point. How are you going to help us do that? So, obviously, I wasn't even on the team at that point, but my director was a staff of one, and as an able-bodied person herself, couldn't on her own start creating an adaptive cycling program. So Peak really became our sort of advisors and consultants in this. along with feedback that we received at several community meetings and several surveys that we ended up putting out. And they are still with us today. They helped us, determine the 13 cycles that we now have, helped us in determining how the program was going to be set up. And then Wheelhouse Detroit, again, we learned a lot from what Biketown was able to do. So similar to the 3 benefits that Liz mentioned that, they have in working with Kerr Bikes, we found a very similar partnership with Wheelhouse Detroit in that, we learned that people wanted to have a place to store their mobility device. They wanted a place where they could, the casual bicyclist and someone who is not familiar with adaptive cycling could learn how to do so in a very quick, 15-minute orientation with a human, a staff member, as opposed to the sort of on-demand self-service kiosks that you see normal bike share offer. And then third, Wheelhouse is located on the Riverwalk and the DeQuinder Cut, which are 2 of the best bicycling facilities in the city of Detroit. And then just those 2 entities on the bottom, we applied for 2 grants to get this program off the ground, and it was a combined $47,000. And that got us pretty much through our first year with maybe $5,000 left over. I will say that, these cycles are incredibly expensive, and that was the majority of our expense. So going forward, I think, one of the many things that we're trying to do to make this system better is figure out a way to make it more financially sustainable, so we're not having to go look for grants every single year. But currently the program is funded through the end of 2020. So hopefully we can, figure out some options going forward. So in working with Peak and, through these community meetings, we wanted to figure out a way to build a program that would mirror our 2-wheeled bike share system. So that was from pass types. All of our pass types with the 2-wheeled system provide unlimited number of rides for a certain period of time. So we have a daily pass, which gives access for 24 hours, a monthly pass, which is 30 days, and a year pass, which is obviously 365 days. So with our pass types with adaptive MoGo, we have a single trip pass and then an adaptive seasonal pass. And since Wheelhouse is only open in the Riverwalk location from April until October, that is when the program is available. So that's why we call it a seasonal pass. Although if you were to buy a pass in May, it would work for, until May of the following year, and you could ride as many times as you want for 2 hours each time. The cycles and accessories, again, working with Peak, we were trying to figure out cycles that were designed for the casual or potentially beginner adaptive cyclist. We didn't want anything that would require a lot of work on the staff at the bike shop to have to customize the cycle to fit an individual. These are people who work at a bike shop. They're not necessarily, long standing members of the disabled community, nor they're relatively new in fitting the disabled population for an adaptive cycle. So they made us, let us know early on that while they were happy to be part of this program, they wanted to make sure that they were, not beholden to long fittings or a lot of customization because they wouldn't feel comfortable setting someone up in that scenario. And then last thing was just branding, making sure that people who were using this program felt like they were still a part of the quote unquote MoGo family. And then who's riding? Again, bike share caters to the casual walk-up customer, not necessarily the person who is riding, 60 to 100 miles on the weekends. People who just need it for, want it for a quick trip or a little bit of recreational exercise. We wanted to make sure that that's what this program was doing as well. And then easy access to cycles and companion riders. So anyone who is coming down there, not as an independent rider, if they were coming down, we've had a lot of people who are visually impaired who come down with a companion cyclist. Anybody who rides with another person, you only pay for one pass. And then we offer free daily passes for anyone who is riding an adaptive cycle independently but is bringing a friend with them to ride along, and that person can ride a 2.0 bike. So yeah, we just wanted to make sure that this was easy for everyone involved to get to ride adaptive MoGo. And so when we launched the program in May of 2018, we actually saw really poor ridership for probably the first 2 months, which really scared us. We had done a ton of work with community outreach, community meetings, surveys. Peak had done a ton of work. They're already really well connected with organizations that cater to people with disabilities. So we had done a lot of work prior to launching the program to make sure that people knew that this service was coming. So when not a lot of people responded by riding it, alarm bells started going off. So we decided to create these adaptive demo days, and basically it was a free 2-hour period where we put all 13 cycles out on the Riverwalk outside the area where Wheelhouse Detroit is, and just invited anybody that we could. Mostly we reached out to a lot of the disability advocacy organizations and organizations that are catering to people with disabilities to come down, use any one of the cycles. Staff from Peak, staff from MoGo were there to help people if they were uncomfortable or unfamiliar with which cycle they should be using based on their individual needs. And after that first demo day, we ended up doing 4 in the first summer. After that first demo day, our ridership went through the roof. So, while I can't really say specifically, I know why that it worked, but I really think that our community just wasn't entirely sure what adaptive MoGo meant and what it could do for them. So just giving them the opportunity, to come down and try a cycle out with an experienced professional who knows what they're doing, understands how cycles can accommodate certain disabled individuals, and then also just making it free, reducing or eliminating that financial barrier, I think was really important so people could understand what they were getting themselves into before they decided to do it on their own. So 2018 was sort of our pilot year. We ended up having 174 trips. As I mentioned, we have 13 cycles. And so that member trips is that adaptive seasonal pass, which was nice to just see that people who were buying into the system weren't just buying a pass and then not getting anything for their money. I don't know if I mentioned this, but the adaptive seasonal pass is $30, and then the single trip pass is $12. And so, yeah, it was just nice to see that people who were buying into that longer term pass were really committing to it and using it a lot. And so now we have a 2-wheeled expansion that is sort of a regional expansion where our bike share system is going to be launching an expansion into an expansion area that is not contiguous with our current service area. So we're hoping to add another pickup and drop-off location for adaptive MoGo and buy more cycles for that 2-wheeled expansion. And then just building up our member base and rider profiles. We use basically a reservation system where anytime someone reserves an adaptive trip, they can enter like custom notes based on their needs. And then that kind of goes into a user database. So eventually what we would love to do is just be able to offer the option to have cycles be dropped off at a location of their choice. Obviously, in that situation, you wouldn't have the protection of being able to place a mobility device in a protected area. But obviously, we would provide a locking mechanism for someone who had a mobility device, but give them the option to ride a bike from a different location as opposed to just Wheelhouse Detroit or whatever bike shop or entity that we end up working with in our expansion area.
Thank you very much, Rory. Up next, we have James Hannig from the AICP City of Milwaukee Department of Public Works. I want to say that right. That's a really long title there, James. And he's going to talk about his integrative adaptive bike pilot from Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I don't know if you can hear me. Here we go. My name's James Hannig. I'm the pedestrian bicycle coordinator at the City of Milwaukee. And I guess maybe just starting at the beginning here. Our conversation started in Milwaukee in 2015, where essentially, upon the launch of our bike share system, which is called Bubbler Bikes, which, a little side note, is named after Milwaukee's endearing term for a drinking fountain, and none exist, and I've been taking weird, nerdy pictures of all the actual bubblers in Portland. So, but in a serious note, as soon as the bike share system was launched, our disability rights community raised concerns that since we were using federal congestion mitigation and air quality funding, that it needed to provide accessibility. And at the time, there were some conversations that were had, but no solution was really identified. And so the conversation just kind of fell to the wayside. Fast forward to summer of 2017, our city's Equal Rights Commission held a listening session on the theme of accessibility. And again, our community advocates raised concerns, but this time it was a little different in that I was at the city, and then also we had an ADA coordinator who could kind of like start doing some research and revisiting the conversation, and looking at programs like Portland and Detroit that were at the time just like starting essentially, or at least that we were able to catch what was happening. But unfortunately, even though we were researching and kind of collecting where the kind of current situation or conversation was, we were moving pretty slowly, and by October of 2017, we received an official ADA grievance, which then kicks in this process where we have to develop a response within 30 days, and we did, and after consulting with our city attorney, they advised us that after doing some deep diving into ADA law, that to provide the level of accommodation that was being requested, that it would fundamentally alter the program, and that advised us that unfortunately we can't do anything at this time. And that just didn't really sit well with us at the time as a department and as public servants to the community. So we kind of continued to do our research and see what was out there and have conversations with you guys, which was awesome. And by March of 2018, we, as a department of Public Works, made some commitments to the Equal Rights Commission. And that was to form a work group similar to what others had done, and really commit to doing a pilot if that's what the work group advised us to do. So we did that. We held 9 meetings roughly every month, and really got a sense of what the community's expectations were for a program. And then Bubbler agreed to operate it on a pilot basis. So after that decision was made just earlier this year, we went through kind of a long process of developing all the agreements and kind of working through like the equipment adjustments. The city bought the actual adaptive cycles. And I'm happy to announce that just earlier this month, we actually launched the program a little behind schedule, but it was exciting. And now we're just in the beginning of that, sort of working through some of the initial kinks, and then really setting up how we're going to evaluate the program. I just want to reiterate really quickly what our short-term commitments were. We're really forming this work group and committing to a pilot, again, if that's what the work group advised us to do. But then also looking at the long term of like, how do you foster and try to grow, an adaptive cycling community, even recognizing that there are a lot of efforts already underway in terms of adaptive sports. And then how do you set up a framework to be able to incorporate adaptive equipment into bike share as it becomes hopefully available. Just wanted to note that we had a number of partners at the table with our work group, ranging from other agency partners with our county to bike shops to bike share operators, academia, and a number of other of our strong advocates, ARP for a brief minute too. I maybe glossed over that we did a brief online community survey, recognizing that with online you're definitely missing some people, and it was only available for about 2 weeks. But we were really happy that we got 1,200 responses, which for us is pretty reasonable, and we were able to kind of do a deeper dive into who responded. So we singled out people who identify themselves as being likely to use, but then also identifying as having a disability. And again, recognizing that that's not necessarily prescriptive, and we certainly asked other questions. One of the things we really wanted to ask is what model, just knowing what sort of models were out there or under consideration, would people would be best fitted to the community and for likely users. And interestingly, among people as identifying as having a disability, it was essentially a tie between station-based, meaning, essentially a docked kiosk setting, which the two-wheel bicycles used, or a staffed location. And it was very adamant from the beginning that our community advocates were encouraging us to not develop a separate but equal system. They felt very strongly that the access needed to be the same as the two-wheeled bike system. And with that, we essentially kind of developed a two-pronged pilot. Bubbler Bikes received a grant from the Anthem Foundation to do some community outreach. So over the course of the summer, they held 4 workshops where people could essentially become accustomed with the same adaptive cycles that we were going to be retrofitting to be incorporated into the bike share system. And it really gave people an opportunity to kind of test out the bikes, learn what some of those barriers and challenges are to encountering them out in the wilderness, right? Because the point is that it would operate the same as the two-wheeled bike system. So, and then on the city side, we bought 17 adaptive cycles, so a mix of hand cycles, upright tricycles, and side-by-side tricycles, and retrofitted them to work with the docked system. And we can get into the more details of how that's working right now in the discussion. Thank you.
My name is Jamie Granquist, and I am the city manager of BikeLNK, or the bike share program that's in Lincoln, Nebraska, that just launched in April of 2018. So essentially, a highlight of our system is we have 100 traditional bicycles with 19, actually 20 now, solar docking stations. We just launched our 20th station. It's an art-covered kiosk that was a contest with local high school students because the area we went into was kind of a lower income, underserved area, and we just really wanted the community to really feel like this bike share station was representative of their community. So that was station number 20, which is great. Had over 50,000 trips in 15 months, which is fantastic, but what we need to think about is who are we not reaching? So we have launched a cash payment program and a low income pass. And then we also just were awarded a grant for a library pass and prescribe a bike programs. So that's pretty cool, trying to take out those financial barriers for people. And then age barrier, lifelong learning classes. We partner with the Sartoma clubs and retirement centers to make sure that seniors, sometimes technology can seem kind of daunting, and so we want to make sure that if it's technology that's an issue, or if it's age that's an issue, or just not knowing, we want people to understand that bike share is for them. We also host some talk about it and partnership workshop classes so that people understand what we're about and how to reach us and how to ride bikes and actually walk them through the process. And then we also have some how-to videos on the socials and site demos on how to check out a bike, because a lot of people see that big kiosk and they think, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. And so instead they just walk away, and we want to make sure that people are empowered to understand that this is about you. This is your ride. This is your thing. And so we want people to have that. And so what we came up with last is obviously adaptive. So we are not reaching those community members who cannot ride our traditional bicycles in our system. And so that's what we started. So starting with this process, I reached out to all these guys and I was just like, hey, I heard you guys have adaptive. What can we do? And the answer to start with was community survey, because people love to answer questions. So our community survey was a partnership with the city of Lincoln, obviously, because they own our equipment. And then Heartland Bike Share is who I'm employed with, and we're the operators of the system. And then the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Outdoor Adventures Bike Shop. They have a really nice big facility that's right off of the bike trail, which we happen to be off the same bike trail, but in a different area. So we're about 2 miles apart, and we thought, you know what, we should really partner with each other and see if we can make 2 locations where people could pick up and drop off these bicycles and have a staffed location where it's a reliable service that they can come to, even though our system right now is dock-based. So what we did is a community survey, and so like James was mentioning, some things are expected, some things are unexpected. People wanted station-based, which we thought was fascinating, because you would think if you arrive with an adaptive product, you need to leave that adaptive product somewhere while you ride the bike. But the people that answered our survey said that they wanted station-based. And then how often would you use an adaptive bike people said frequently and sometimes way more than they said rarely. And so there is that usage data that says people would love to see that. And then people would also like the ability to use the program on the weekends and during the weekdays. It's not something where they want to see that it's only available in the evenings or on holidays or whatever. It needs to be useful for these folks. And then they also want to be able to ride and go places and have these destinations just like anyone else with a regular bicycle. And so those kind of data points were really interesting for us to be able to see that, you know what, we're not all that different. We just want to get from here to there, and we want to have an enjoyable experience and be treated like, you know, a member of the community. And so that's what we came up with. Mine's kind of a short and sweet thing. We are at the applying for grant stages right now, and so it's funding right now is where we're at. So we've got the data points to show that people want it. We've got the community initiative to show that people would like to have it. And so it's just how do we make those funds available so that we can get these bikes out there for people to use. So that's all I've got. Aaron Goldbeck is from the DDOT from Washington, D.C., and he's going to talk about adaptive bike share in the D.C. region. So, Aaron. Yeah, you can absolutely control it.
Hi, everyone. My name is Aaron Goldbeck. Yes, I work for DDOT, which is the District of Columbia Department of Transportation. And I'm actually going to tell you about two different adaptive bike programs that I've been involved with, neither of which have been particularly successful. So I want you to learn from my mistakes. I'll be sharing with you a lot of data and discussing primarily the challenges that you might encounter if this is something you're thinking of bringing to your community, and I hope you are, because this is doable. And I'm going to show you, I think, two great ways not to do it. So here we go. First thing is actually, before I was at DDOT, I was at the University of Maryland. I was the campus bicycle coordinator, and I managed their sort of boutique bike share network there. It was called M-Bike. It was operated by a company called Zagster, and the reason why we selected Zagster actually is they were the only company that included adaptive options in their bike share network. It was a product that they supported, and that was a huge reason for us to select them because the university had a paratransit commitment, so it was something that we were very excited about. This gives you just a really quick overview of what Zagster, or what the M-Bike system looked like. 180 two-wheel bikes and then 6 adaptive bikes across 23 stations. It was on a membership model or a pay-as-you-go model, similar to a lot of bike share. This ran from 2016 and just folded up recently. Zagster is pretty much transitioning out of the conventional bike share space, and the University of Maryland has switched providers. They've moved over to CycleHop. So I've got 3 years of data from this program to share with you. So the University of Maryland, if you're not familiar, it's the flagship university of the state of Maryland. It's a land-grant institution. It's got about 50,000 people on campus on an average day. So a fairly substantial university, and essentially the bike share network here was a TDM measure. And again, I'm not sure that this really was a success. We were only able to enroll about 4,100 members, which out of 50,000 people over 3 years is not great. We had about 140,000 total trips, which is, actually that's fairly good, especially considering the small membership pool. The people who used M-Bike used it a lot. However, out of that 140,000 trips, the number of trips from the adaptive fleet, those 6 adaptive bikes that we had, were very small. You can see right there, 650 tandem rentals, 473 trike rentals, only 83 hand cycle rentals, and only 95 recumbent rentals, and that's over 3 years. So Zagster did not really deliver on a lot of the functionality that we wanted. You were not able to actually find these bikes, particularly specifically on the app. If you pulled up the Zagster app on your phone, you could see where the bikes were, but you couldn't differentiate the adaptive bikes, and that's something that Zagster said that they were going to provide over and over again, ultimately never did. So that was a disappointment. So they were difficult to find. There was no pedagogical element. There was no, training, right? On, if it was a hand cycle, for example, and you did not know how to operate it, it was up to you to figure it out on your own on the street corner in suburban Maryland. Nor was there any storage solution. So if you had a personal mobility device to reach the adaptive cycle, you had nowhere to put it. So I'm not sure that this was a success. So I left the University of Maryland in 2018. I went over to DDOT, and I was really excited about trying again and hopefully doing a better job creating a more robust adaptive bike program for the entire District of Columbia. I have so far failed to do that, but let's talk about that next. We began with a survey here. I had a lot of support from my boss, Kim Lucas, who's very interested in this because DC's bike share network, Capital Bike Share, is one of the oldest and most well-developed dock-based bike share systems in the country. It has never had that ADA compliance element to it. It has never had an adaptive element to it. And there's never been the bandwidth within DDOT to bring that. So when I came on board and I was excited about it, that was sort of the moment that we could begin this work. We began with a survey, like many of us have done, because we're planners and we're interested in data and making data-driven decisions. What we saw was a real interest in cargo tricycles, and I think that's because our sample size skewed towards more of a retirement and older population, where most of our respondents. And then sort of moderate interest in the various other types. The majority of people who responded to the survey had never used an adaptive bike before, which was good, which is what we want to see. What really surprised me, what really jumped out, and I don't know how to do the laser thing, but on the left, you can see that people were actually very comfortable riding either on off-street trails, which we expected, but also on streets with bike lanes, which we did not expect. We kind of thought that people were not going to want to ride in an urban environment, but we see that there's a lot of comfort with that idea. However, streets without bike lanes, no. People do not want to do that. So that helped us try and find a location to have a pilot program. We wanted to do more of a bike library concept. Our bike share operator is not able to include an adaptive option in Capital Bike Share, so we wanted to have a place where we could have staff, where we could have storage for personal mobility devices, where we could have that pedagogical element, train people on how to use the equipment they'd never used before and fit them to that equipment correctly. And we saw, a week preference here in the survey data as well towards weekends. This is something people are interested in doing less as a transit mode, at least according to our survey data. It's less of a transit mode and more of something that people are interested in exploring for either recreational or to, I think probably test ride before they purchase their own personal adaptive cycle is my interpretation of this data. So from there, we did engage a stakeholder group. We brought together 24 advocates and members of this community and vendors and people in the private sector, people in the public sector. And we began trying to figure out how to make this thing happen. And unfortunately, this is where we have been stuck. It is not a funding issue. I've got a $8.5 million annual budget. I can buy the bikes, that's no problem. I am tangled in a mess of red tape though. I cannot really hire staff. And that's really what we need at this point. I've engaged with our city Department of Parks and Rec. I've engaged with the National Park Service. I've engaged with advocacy groups. Nobody is quite willing or able to actually do the work of being, on a weekend at a rec center, doing the training, storing the equipment. That's where we are stuck right now. I am working with, federal partners and with local partners, and everybody is very supportive of the idea. And that's about where we're stuck. So I'm going to keep working on it, and I've got a lot of ideas. We've got a wonderful bike advocacy group in the District of Columbia, and I'm going to see if I can get them to staff this, because I think it would be a great complement to their mission. So I guess the moral of the story is even when you've got the money, it still is tough to do because finding the people in the space is a challenge. So that's where I'm at with it. Thanks.
Good job.
Thank you.
Awesome. So we're going to go back up to this slide while we have a chat, because I think that this slide just really says what we're here for, right? I mean, that's why we're talking about this, is we want to change from the top picture to the bottom picture. And so I'm going to ask our panel some questions to kind of get the conversation flowing, and I want you guys to kind of think about questions that you have for our panel as well. So I'm going to start with Liz. So what is your city's biggest lesson learned from launching adaptive bike share?
See, I should have reread all the questions before today. I mean, I think, and I don't know, Jeremy can jump in, but I actually think it's the connections that we've made with the representatives from the disability community and the organizations that were on our work group. I think, again, as Jeremy touched on and I mentioned, prior to Adaptive Biketown, the city, we hadn't really worked with members of the disability community on any of our types of projects. And I think that this, although, started by not engaging them, we came out with a work group that was a dedicated work group. I mean, Jeremy knows. I now call on our work group. There was a picture of Deidre up here. She comes out to every Sunday Parkways and rides Adaptive Bike Town, and is a great ambassador for our program. And so I would say our success is really those relationships that we started and are continuing to build off, and now can continue those conversations on other City of Portland projects.
Great. So I'm going to ask James this question. So how did you decide to introduce an adaptive component in your bike share program?
In terms of the equipment?
Whatever. This question is you, man.
So, I mean, we really looked to the work group to advise us on essentially what model they thought would be most appropriate. So I think there was a long period of time where we were having these work group meetings. Everyone had awesome ideas and was like really working toward this like long-term vision, but we kind of kept spinning our wheels, no pun intended. Like we couldn't let the like perfect be the enemy of good. In like everyone was like, well, it has to be 100% integrated with Butler, with B-Cycle system. And we'd be like, they don't make the equipment, so what can we do? And here's what other communities are doing. And it said, well, that's not good enough. Like, we have to continue to, strive for this ideal, like, setting. And we responded to that. We want that. That's where we want to arrive at the end. So I think it took a while, but then eventually Butler was like, well, maybe we can do something. And it's like, well, we have this thing where when we lock docks, we have this little bar that goes in. Maybe we can attach that to the bike. And all of a sudden, all it took was just someone having like just an interesting, like, almost harebrained kind of idea. And I was like, yeah, let's try that. Let's see if we can do it. And all of a sudden just kind of like became the pilot. It was like the solution that we could move forward and that people would be happy with. So I think that's kind of, it very organically happened, but I want to say that, it takes a lot of like experimenting and kind of like trying to figure out what you do have and what you can work with.
Fantastic. So I'm going to ask Rory this question. So who were some of the most important partners in launching the adaptive bike share, and how has their role changed since launch, if at all?
Well, I guess I kind of touched on this in the presentation, but I think if anyone was looking to start a similar adaptive cycling program within their bike share or just in their city at all, having an organization like Peak program or a different spokes, here in Portland. I don't know if I quite mentioned this when I was speaking, but Peak has been working in the active transportation and cycling for the disabled community for the last 2 decades probably. So, they came in as like the experts of the field, and we really leaned on them a lot to kind of advise us and send us down the right path. So, having an organization like them, it seems like the work group is sort of a common theme amongst the group up here. Just having, some advocates in the disabled community who can, continue to push us as people who are providing the program, and also just constantly provide feedback as to how they would want the program to look and how they would use it is really important. And then, I think that the sort of toss-up going forward, and like Liz in Portland, and then Detroit, MoGo, we have these partnerships with bike shops, but then there seems to be a lot of demand, and other organizations like Zagster that have tried the station-based model, and I don't know what the right one is. It would be great if more bike share equipment vendors provided adaptive cycling options. Then again, is that the way that people want to use them? I'm not really sure. So those are the people that kind of helped us in launching the program. But then, as now that we've had it for the last 2 years, obviously the bike shop is still a really important part of this. If we didn't have them, we wouldn't have a program. But then peak has been, I mentioned the demo days. We had 4 of them our first year. We've had 5 of them this year. Our pool of adaptive riders has become so much more diverse, and I don't necessarily mean in the terms of socioeconomic background or racial background, but we have such a large pool of adaptive cycling riders now, and I really attribute a lot of that to the fact that we've had demo days, that we've continued to go out and talk to community groups and organizations that provide options for people with disabilities to see if they have interest in adaptive MoGo, and then they have this opportunity to come out and try our program for free before they do it on their own. So that's really been a big part of our success, has been peak, continuing with us going forward.
Yeah, thanks for that. So, Aaron, what's been done to engage with the community and potential users of your adaptive program?
Probably not enough. We have tried to reach out to the community in DC. DC is a large city. It is not just one community. It is challenging for us to identify who would be the constituency for this program, where those people are, and how to talk to them. We don't necessarily know those things. So a lot of effort has just gone into identifying who even the stakeholders are. So we've had moderate success reaching out to people in the older population because they're very engaged. We have actually an age-friendly DC plan. So through that sort of planning process and those stakeholders, we were able to reach out to them, and likewise through the accessible DC planning that we do. But I don't think that we're touching everybody through those outreach initiatives. When you talk to people who are already engaged in transportation planning as advocates, you're talking to the people who are already showing up. And I think this is a perennial problem in planning, is how do you reach out to those people who are not coming to community meetings, who are not as engaged necessarily, who are not savvy or native internet users. And I think that's a real challenge. So I don't have a great answer to that question because I don't think we've done a good job yet.
I'm not sure there are great answers to that question. Jeremy, so I'm going to ask you this. What do you think has been the biggest success to date as far as adaptive bike sharing goes?
I think, it's partnerships, and the fact that we continue to get funding from Nike says a lot. They have been a really good partner for us in the adaptive bike town program. They also have done a lot with the regular bike town program. And so I think it's just continuing to foster those relationships. And, in the city of Portland, the hope again is this, not the equality, is the equity. And so to find partners that are willing to develop thought processes and programming that's more towards this, I think, is the key thing. But yeah, it's all about the groups that we work with, PBOT continuing to be a really a vital partner, and then some other folks that have a bunch of money, and so that's what we want, and hopefully they continue to give more money as they see that the program is growing and that the ridership is continuing to increase, and that there's just value in offering these things for people. That's kind of the bottom line.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. So that wraps up our panel questions. So I'm going to turn it over to you guys. I want you to think about questions that you've thought about while we've had this presentation. Yes?
So most of these examples are like retrofits into existing systems. I'm wondering, you've probably thought about this. If you were designing the whole system over, starting from the beginning, you've got a bunch of capital dollars to start a bike share for all abilities and the whole population. How would you start differently? What would you do different from the beginning?
Well, I'll jump in because I think I'm sort of in that position because I'm not attempting a retrofit for a number of reasons. One, basically, my operator said we can't do that. And that's something that, maybe I could push them or maybe I could fire them and I could find a new operator. But it would, I think, ironically create ADA violations, right? Because I've got a dock-based bike share system. So if we had these bikes with different physical spatial requirements and they were docking with our existing infrastructure, they would potentially obstruct, like path travel right away on sidewalks and stuff. So that's never been the way forward. I think there's probably different answers for different communities, but I feel like having a facility or multiple facilities, spacing them out of rec centers, spacing them out of transit accessible areas, having staff with training, ideally with like a PT, OT background, who can fit people, who can really take someone who has never used an adaptive bike, securely store their personal mobility device and set them up with the vehicle. I mean, I think that's, based on my experience trying to develop these systems, I think that's the way to do it. But I am very interested to hear what other people think, because I don't know.
I do think it's a combination. Again, you've heard from all of us in sort of the surveys that we like to do. And in Portland, we did hear that while there were some respondents that they said they wanted this to be part of our bike share system. We don't have a fully docked system, but they want to be a part of that system. But we heard predominantly that they wanted a staffed, much more rental type program. And so even though that there are talks and we'd love to figure out how to get other types of bikes into our bike share system, we firmly feel that the adaptive bike town model needs to continue to exist here in Portland to offer that, the place to store mobility device, to offer the fitting assistance. However, I think that, and we'd hear from some of our writers, that having a single location is definitely a barrier. So I think, again, piggybacking off of Jeremy, with potentially more funding, our partners, our operators are willing to open up some other locations, but it does come down to funding, but having sort of more access points. But I think if we were to do it again, I think there would be some integrating into our system, but it wouldn't be replacing the program that we've developed.
I think if I can piggyback on that a little bit too, and I hate to keep relying on it, but I think a lot of it comes down to that graphic. I mean, there's not a one size fits all, even programmatically, getting down on the bike level, but also like from a program. I mean, our advocates were adamant that it had to be, an integrated system. And, I think to a degree, maybe manufacturers need to be a little bit motivated to know that there is a market for, essentially all abilities, and sometimes that may not be a two-wheeled bicycle, but it might be others, and that's hard because they are companies often that are making profits, and that's their job, is to sell products, right? So encouraging them to know that there's a broader market out there and that this is something that people want, I think is important, because I think it's probably a blend, because while we're trying out and piloting this integrated system, there are certain things that are kind of not accommodated then, like the storage of mobility devices, or if someone needs help being able to get into a particular adaptive cycle, like that doesn't exist right now, and so that's a major challenge. And so one of the things that we really intentionally tried to do with this pilot is, those are the things that we're going to evaluate and measure in terms of what is feasible for future phases. Maybe we have to go back to the drawing board on some things, or maybe we have to kind of adapt the program itself. So.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I was going to say, just to that end, there was no blueprint when we started this. It was from scratch. I mean, really, bike share programs had just come around. They were super popular. How come things aren't talked about with accessibility in the first place anyway? They never are. I mean, this is my life. This is the reality of it. And so I think now that we kind of have a blueprint, that it is more a part of the conversation piece, we can pressure manufacturers to figure out different ways to make these pieces of equipment so that they're more user-friendly. As far as adaptive bikes go, the sky's the limit. Even since we started this program, if you look at the trends in adaptive cycles, almost every adaptive cycle that's sold now is sold with a power assist unit. It just, again, it further levels the playing field. It makes it so that dads can take their kids on bike rides with hills. And that's also the point of this. If you can figure out in these communities, how come these people want to ride? And I can talk about paralyzed folks, you know, there's a huge number of fathers that no longer have the ability to connect with their kids and their families in the same way. Kids love to ride bikes. If we can get a dad on an adaptive bike, it doesn't have to be a fancy one, it just has to be adaptive so that they can use it. It changes the outcome of the way in which they go in their lives. It changes it for their kids, for their spouses. And so I think now that we kind of have this blueprint that we get, oh, okay, this is really fundamentally something that we should be doing. It is something that we can do. And so now we're going forth, and that's why I think you see as many cities trying to figure it out. But it was kind of a shot in the dark at the time. And unfortunately, like most things that involve the ADA, it takes litigation before people really recognize, oh, you know, we should have been doing this all along. So thank you for asking that question, though. I think it's a huge one.
Yeah.
I have 2 questions. First, can you talk about the bike shops that you're operating with? Are they non-profit bike shops, or are they for-profit bike shops doing this for a contract? And generally, do they see this as a good return on investment? And do you see their involvement as continuing and sustainable? And then the second question is, have you seen any examples of bike share operators like Bird, Lyft, or Jump that are doing a good job of, you know, providing adaptive bikes or adaptive bike share options?
So I can speak to the partnership here in Portland. So we're partnering with Kerr Bikes, which is actually, it is a nonprofit bike shop. They're actually under Albertina Kerr Centers, which is a nonprofit that serves people with developmental disabilities. And they've been running a bike shop for a while now as sort of a way to make money for some of their programs at Albertina Kerr. And so we were, quite frankly, lucky that there was a bike shop operating in Portland that had a similar sort of mission and value to what we were trying to accomplish with Adaptive Bike Town, that they had 2 brick and mortar bike rental shops, both near our waterfront and near our multi-use paths, and again had the infrastructure in place to sort of run the rentals. So for the pilot, we ran sort of a grant with Albertina Kerr, so provided $20,000 for them to buy the bikes. So Kerr Bikes owns our bikes, and then they could keep any of the revenue from our rides. So our rides are comparable to that of a Bike Town ride, so it's $5 for an hour and then $12 for 3 hours. However, if somebody comes in and says that cost is still a barrier, we have set aside a pot of money to completely subsidize a ride, so we don't want anyone that is turned away for cost. And so again, the amount of money that they're collecting on the revenue, like shared, we had 189 rides last year. It's not a considerable amount of revenue, but Kerr is able to keep that. This year, we have actually switched to sort of a services contract with Albertina Kerr and Kerr Bikes. So they have a contract to be our operator with the city, and then they'll be invoicing us on a quarterly basis sort of for the hours. And that actually has allowed us to extend the hours of operation, have some more on-call hours. So although our peak riding season is, May to October, if we can have nice weather at other parts. So if they decide to open up or somebody makes a reservation online, they'll fulfill that reservation. So that contract relationship has allowed us to expand our partnership with Kerr Bikes.
Yeah, and then ours is slightly different. So Wheelhouse Detroit is a for-profit bike shop, and the way that they had wanted us to do this program was we showed them the 13 cycles that we wanted to provide. They do not have storage space in their Riverwalk facility, so we have to rent a mobile MIDI container, and is housed, maybe 20 feet from their shop. But we pay for the storage for that container for the period of time that it is out there and the cycles are out there. But then they basically told us what they would normally and want to rent one of the 13 adaptive cycles that we had chosen for a 2-hour period. And, we wanted to make sure that this wasn't an affordable option, and we felt that their prices were not affordable. So basically what we're doing is, I mentioned that we have a $12 2-hour pass, and then a $30 adaptive seasonal pass that gets you as many rides as you want for a year. So basically we're just paying them per ride, what they would normally rent that cycle out for, and we pull that money from the grants that we have. So, kind of speaking to the financial sustainability point, figuring out how we make that more sustainable going forward. And, the $12 and $30 fee prices that we bring in, that doesn't fill the void, obviously, because we are trying to make it more affordable. So there's a bit of a gap there. So I think if we were to cut a lot of other elements, we could make it more financially sustainable, but there'll still be that little gap just from the rentals. And then to speak to your second question, to my knowledge, there are no bike share providers or equipment manufacturers that provide adaptive cycling options. I think all of us have purchased cycles from third-party manufacturers or companies that have been doing adaptive cycling for a longer period of time, but there are no bike share providers.
Yeah, I think maybe Aaron can speak to this a little more.
Maybe Zagster's
too.
yeah.
Zagster did provide adaptive bikes as part of a semi-docked model before, and I don't mean to throw any shade toward them, but it was interesting that it just so happened that they were converting to a dockless model around the same time that we were having a lot of these conversations in Milwaukee, and they for marketing reasons were essentially telling us that, well, we really think that the dockless model would be a better fit, and we're offering the adaptive cycles as part of that, but that really didn't get to the core concern that was raised, which was you're using federal money and you're not providing accessibility. And so by developing, some sort of pilot or study for dockless bikes, it wasn't really getting at the core of the city having skin in the game, essentially.
Yeah, I'm not aware of a market solution that's like turnkey and would meet my high standards. And I feel like this has come across as being pretty down on Zagster. They tried, and I give them a lot of credit for being pretty much the only people to get into that space and really make a go of it. And my relationship with them was very positive. So I don't want people to come away from this thinking that I am mad at them. I'm more mad at the National Park Service right now than Zagster. So I think they really did give it a pretty good shot, but it never quite worked out. Frankly, right now, Razor has got a seated e-scooter thing, and that's the closest thing I can think of, a dockless, somewhat accessible micromobility solution. Nothing else comes to mind.
It's complicated.
Yeah.
So back to the Milwaukee question. So am I to understand that the adaptive bikes that you had actually could be docked at the regular stations?
Yeah. So we essentially purchased 17 adaptive cycles from a separate vendor, and then Bubbler Bikes, our operator, was able to work a fix essentially that would make them compatible with the B-Cycle docks, at least for a temporary basis. B-Cycle has been very gracious in allowing this, at least for an interim period, when you start talking about intellectual property and licensing, but it's something that they're letting us try out right now.
So can one take an adaptive bike and lock it at any B-Cycle?
Yep, it works essentially just like any two-wheeled bicycle.
And can you see on the app or whatever that's an adaptive bike?
Good question. So that's part of some of the details we're working through right now. There's an issue with being able to display different types of cycles on the app. Right now it only allows for two-wheeled bicycles or two-wheeled e-bikes. So there's some functionality there, but there needs to be something created. So kind of the workaround is they can pull the IDs from each bike and then embed it in a table that goes to this landing page for the adaptive program. So in real time, someone can tell where the bikes are, but maybe not in a map format.
Got it. And sorry, one more thing. Do you find that the size and the shape of those bikes ends up creating, as was mentioned by others, issues with, blocking a sidewalk or some area where they stick out further than the regular bikes.
Yeah, that's still a few things that we're working through, but for the most part, even the widest side-by-side tricycle just happens to fit in most of the configurations for our B-cycle docks, and we're just working on having some information on what people should do when they encounter one that is narrower, essentially. So we're kind of working through it. It works in like 80% of the cases, but it's not perfect.
Yeah.
So we've sort of used the blanket term adaptive cycles, and most of you seem to have fleets somewhere in the teens. But one of the intimidating things, I think, probably for a lot of operators, is just how many types of adaptive bicycles do you have within your fleet, and what, say, like a layman's guess, what proportion of the community that you're trying to serve are you meeting their needs with those types of bicycles? Because for a bike share system, you're used to the Model T Ford, it's a bike, and are you talking 3 or 4 or 17?
You guys have the biggest range, right?
Yeah, so we have 13 cycles, and I want to say 9 different types. Maybe it's 8 different types. I honestly, I couldn't tell you like percentage of the, what percentage of the population we are serving with these cycles. I can guarantee you it's not all of them. But that was why we kind of went through a pretty lengthy process before we decided what to get, just in listening to people who would use the service and listening to Peak and having them give us the feedback of, this can accommodate, this group of people, and then this cycle can accommodate this group of people. I mean, honestly, prior to that, I didn't even realize a tandem was something that would be used by someone who was visually impaired. I was like, a 2-wheel tandem could be fun on a weekend with like me and my brother, but had no idea like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense for someone who is sighted to sit in front and then someone who is visually impaired to sit in back. So, that was really helpful, but I don't doubt that we're not serving the entire population.
Yeah, I mean, that was a big topic of discussion at our work group. And at the time, we had the owner of Different Spokes, which was a bike shop that provided exclusively adaptive bikes. And we talked a lot about, okay, yeah, what's the sort of largest proportion that we think we can accommodate, knowing that, and I think Jeremy and others said, this is not going to be able to serve everybody, but how are we able to increase that access with this program? And so I think, yeah, we've got 3-4 different types of bikes, hand cycles, a couple different types of tricycles, including now 2 e-assist tricycles, and then a side-by-side tandem and a front and back tandem. And I think the hand cycles were the ones that I think we had the most, weren't totally sure on because of all the different styles of hand cycles. And we went with, again, the more traditional sort of upright hand cycles, again, looking to serve people that were maybe just starting to bike, hadn't used an adaptive bike before, and this would be a nice entry point, and then could also be a resource for if they wanted to transition to other types of hand cycles.
I think I could just say, like, our conversations were pretty similar in Milwaukee, and I think it's fair to say that we know that it would be impossible to accommodate every level of ability, and I think it was really important to people that this not be considered a disability only program. So even with our phrasing, we tried to make everything about, this is really about accommodating all ages and abilities as much as we could. And recognizing that it's a pilot, so we're going to have to make some decisions and kind of make some assumptions on what we need to at least get a good baseline and kind of learn what people tell us about their experience, and really focusing on that user experience and trying to walk people through the process a little bit. Now I lost my train of thought. Anyone else?
Oh, that's great. Did anybody else have any other questions? Oh, yeah.
Say on that note, about it not being just for the disabled community, I guess, you mentioned tandem bikes, and I think it's also about the cargo bikes. Is there any intention or idea to market this towards families wanting to do a grocery run with a cargo bike, or potentially someone who just wants to borrow a tandem bike for the weekend, sort of expanding the user group a little bit, since you're already storing non-standard bikes?
I mean, I know in the Portland Adaptive Program, you know, it's not exclusively for people with disabilities, which I think is great because there needs to be more education about just the number of adaptive bikes that are out there. And then I think during the initial pilot, we had way more able-bodied people that took advantage of the program than disabled people. And the other thing too is in Portland, it really is a destination program. And so families will come from Seattle or from down south or wherever it is to ride the bikes. And so it makes sense that if you can open that up to the entire family, that's going to be a more enjoyable experience for them. So, you know, I think there is a priority system that needs to be in place. But other than that, if they're not being utilized, why not open them up to everybody?
Yeah, and actually, so Kerr Bikes, because they were already an existing bike rental shop, they have a whole host of other bikes that they rent out. If you go to the waterfront over the next couple of days, you'll probably see like the Surreys and other types of bikes. So they have those available at their shop and rent those out to anyone. We do, and I think I mentioned sort of the, you know, who we're trying to serve. Our cost, the $5 per hour, you know, $12 for 3 hours, is if somebody comes in and says, I qualify for this Honor Citizens Pass. And again, it's just a question, and we say, you know, do you identify as somebody with a disability, or, you know, over 65? We don't ask for any proof or anything. However, if somebody says, no, I don't, I'm just interested in trying out the bike, Kerr does charge them their standard rates for rental, which again, I would think would probably pretty akin to what, you know, sort of that, what you guys are trying to subsidize, that gap between what your operators would charge. And so again, it's more like $15 an hour or something like that. But because there's other bikes for rent at the existing shop, we do have a whole host of other ones that people can ride.
Yeah.
My question is for Liz, sorry. And I'm just wondering on the work group membership, on how work group members were recruited, and were they provided a stipend, and also is this kind of a long-standing work group that will be in place to kind of continually provide recommendations on the program or future iterations?
That's a great question. So the work group members, it was actually, when we were charged to run a pilot, we had a number of one-on-one conversations with a number of organizations, and that's kind of when we said, well, maybe we should get everyone in a room to talk through some of the programmatic elements. And so really it was basically through that kind of networking and interest from folks. So there was not a formal kind of application process. It was through those conversations and then asking, okay, is there somebody else that should be in the room that isn't, just from our one-on-one conversations. No, we did not offer stipends. I would say the city of Portland over the last probably 2 years has really grown on sort of how we, you know, number one, recruit for these work groups, but also how we compensate for them. Not that it's was really compensating for their time, but tried to provide food and meet at a time that would work for most folks. And it is not ongoing. We met for like 4 or 5 meetings over the span of 4 months. It's kind of the promise we made, so we wouldn't continue to take up their time after that. And again, as the city of Portland is working on sort of the rules for stakeholder groups and ongoing standing bodies, trying to eliminate sort of as many of those standing bodies as possible. But I do keep in contact with most everyone on that group and have tried to facilitate their joining some of our existing bodies at the city of Portland.
Great. Well, we need to wrap it up, so I want to thank you guys all for coming. I want you guys to remember that cities are made for people, and all we're trying to do is get people from here to there in a safe, comfortable, and equitable manner. And so what I want you to leave with on this conference today is that just open your mind and think about those tough questions that need to be answered so that we can just get people from here to there in a city that's made for them. Thank you.